In a world set in the not-so-distant future, completely immersive virtual reality games had become commonplace, earning them a reputation for being retro. As a result, there were very few masterpieces in gaming, and an overwhelming number of game releases were considered trash. Their designs fell far short of the graphic technological capabilities of the time. Despite most people dismissing these games, which made sense since they were admittedly terrible, some individuals found a unique fascination with them. After all, there's a taste for everything. These people who dedicated themselves to playing these lousy games came to be known as bad game hunters. Our protagonist, Rakuro Hizutome, a high school junior, was one of them. The anime starts with Rakuro defeating the final boss in one of these terrible games called Faria Chronicle Online. In this game, the villain was an evil deity. After the deity's defeat, the game's main character, Faria, was overjoyed because her journey had come to an end. But just as Rakuro completed the game, he delivered a swift kick to Faria's face, declaring that she was the real culprit behind all the game's problems, thus putting an end to one of the worst lousy games Rakuro had ever played. He felt greatly relieved and happy that the suffering was finally over, akin to a prisoner who had just been set free. This made him eager to find his next bad game, just to experience that sensation all over again. The next day, Rakuro began his day as usual, snacking before heading to school. His mother had a collection of insects, indicating her passion for entomology. Rakuro mentioned to his mother that one of her butterflies had escaped its cage before leaving for school. At school, students discussed their plans for the upcoming summer vacation, which was starting the next day. Meanwhile, a girl named Rie Sega, also a high school junior, who clearly had a crush on Rakuro, observed him from afar, trying to muster the courage to approach him. She rehearsed a conversation in her mind, intending to use game as a conversation starter, as she knew it was something Rakuro liked. However, her attempt was foiled when one of Rakuro's friends approached him, thwarting any opportunity for her to get closer. After school, Ria visited a game rental store called Rock Roll, where the manager, Mana Iwamaki, was preparing the store for the summer vacation rush. When Ria entered the store, Mana greeted her and, noticing Ria looking around, informed her that Rakuro wasn't there. Ria tried to cover up the real reason for her visit, saying she was looking for new games, but it was evident that she was infatuated with Rakuro. Mana, however, saw through her intentions and revealed that Rakuro wouldn't be showing up anytime soon. She explained that Rakuro had challenged himself to play a particularly terrible game for quite some time, which had kept him away from the store. Mana then showed Ria a game that one of their customers was renting. The game had terrible ad for allies, extremely difficult enemy attacks, and was riddled with bugs. This made Faria Chronicle Online, legendary in the realm of bad games, a perfect fit for bad game hunters, as it required a lot of skill, even to get past the first challenge. Unbeknownst to them, Rakuro had already completed the game, and he arrived at the store at that moment to return it and ran an even more challenging game. When Ria saw her crush entering the store, she hastily hid, lacking the courage to face him. Rakuro excitedly began recounting his experience with Faria Chronicle Online to Mana, expressing how it was the ultimate terrible game. He explained that the protagonist, Faria, was incredibly annoying, causing all the problems in the game. She killed her group mates, irritated the villagers, and halted the journey whenever she got upset. To make things worse, she always blamed the final boss for everything, a character that Rakuro couldn't help but despise. The game even allowed players to take out their frustration by beating Faria for 3 minutes as a reward for defeating the final boss. Rakuro described how achieving this was a deeply purifying experience for him. While Rakuro enthusiastically spoke of how terrible the game was, Rai observed him from a distance. He mentioned that he had no idea how to find a game that surpassed the level of awfulness of that one. Mana then proposed something new. She told Rakuro about a new game in the store called Shangri-La Frontier, a game that was the complete opposite of terrible, widely regarded as a successful virtual reality game with over 30 million players. Confronted with something entirely different from what he was accustomed to, Rakuro accepted the challenge and took the legendary bad game home. There, he did some research on this new game and found out that it had set a record for the highest number of simultaneous players. Rakuro then read the game's synopsis, learning that it was set in a world 1,000 years after a space colony had vanished during a journey through the universe, leaving behind a new human society where players lived freely with medieval technology. He reflected on how this world was much more intriguing than the one he had previously played. After finishing his canned drink, Rakuro finally installed the game on his computer, eager to start playing a genuinely good game after spending so much time on terrible ones. When he logged in, he began by creating his character, needing to choose a class, and was impressed by the sheer number of options the game offered. Rakuro ended up selecting a dual-wielding mercenary class, finding it flexible. Next, he chose his character's nativeness as a wanderer to gain bonuses to luck, which increased his critical hit rate and the chance to obtain items in the game. Lastly, he customized his character's appearance, once again amazed by the vast array of choices, from body type and race to even tiny details like adjusting the eyes and hair. However, he realized he was getting a bit too emotional being so accustomed to playing low-quality games. He decided to focus on creating his first detailed character instead. The final result wasn't all that rich in details, as Rakuro chose to leave his character almost entirely without clothing or accessories. This was because his gameplay style involved ignoring armor to sell his initial equipment for a better weapon. However, to avoid people recognizing his character as a nudist, he added the only available mask, resulting in a character with little clothing and a bird-like face. Another quirk of Rakuro was his habit of always naming his characters Sunraku, a fusion of his first and second names. Once everything was ready, he followed the game's instructions and lay down in a stable place. He skipped the prologue, eager to begin his first divine game. From the start, he was impressed by the game's level of detail, and the experience of moving within it felt almost lifelike. He started exploring by running and climbing trees, getting a better view of the in-game forest and being enchanted by the landscape. Next, he opened his map, surprised that he didn't start in a beginner tutorial city. He didn't know that choosing Wanderer as his nativeness would place him randomly as a beginner. However, since the initial map was straightforward, Rakuro easily located the nearest city called Firstia, located to the east. After orienting himself, Rakuro began walking towards the city, learning more about the game, such as his character's low defense due to the lack of armor or any protection on his body. Yet he decided to trust the luck bonus he had gained by choosing to be a wanderer. Right at that moment, Rakuro was attacked by a goblin, and it was time to use his two swords for the first time. He managed to defeat the creature with a single blow since it was a beginner-level enemy. This allowed Rakuro to level up and even acquire the goblin's axe. However, he had barely finished his first fight when he noticed another enemy approaching. Unlike the goblin, this was a much faster and more dangerous Vorpal rabbit, which almost dealt a fatal blow to Rakuro. Seconds after the first attack, it lunged again, but Rakuro blocked it with his swords and managed to land the first blow on the rabbit. However, it proved stronger than the goblin, being defeated only after Rakuro's second attack. Being a tougher enemy, his character gained 2 levels instead of just 1, but the rabbit didn't leave behind any weapons. Rakuro was disappointed because he had really wanted the rabbit's knife. The game then showed him that he could learn new abilities by using certain actions, which once again left Rakuro impressed by the game's quality. Realizing how effective defensive and dodging skills were even against higher-level enemies, he wished to try various combat styles. At that moment, Rakuro finally noticed that he hadn't encountered a single bug in the game so far, which was rare for him because in lousy games, there were bugs everywhere, such as things becoming invisible, the ability to pass through walls that shouldn't be passed through, and not being able to attack an enemy even when close to it. He was becoming increasingly enamored with this divine game and was determined to make the most of every minute he spent playing, all in the hopes of acquiring that Vorpal rabbit's knife. After a long time of playing and facing enemies in the forest, he gained new abilities and more experience points, reaching level 12 and becoming much more advanced than before. Moreover, he finally got the rabbit's knives he had desired after defeating 50 of them, concluding that it was indeed a rare enemy, as it didn't appear as frequently as he'd hoped, requiring a lot of gameplay to find all of them. Despite the effort, it was worth it because the 2 knives were better than the swords he had. So after allocating some points, Rakuro decided to move forward to find even stronger enemies since the area he was in was for beginners. However, when he opened the map, he realized he was much closer to the city of Secondale now than to Firstia, with only a bridge to cross to get there. As he reached the bridge, he encountered the first true adversary in the game, a giant snake blocking the bridge. It was necessary to defeat her to cross. Rakuro noticed that the game recommended facing the giant snake with a group of 3 people, which excited him even more as it made facing the enemy alone without using any defense even more challenging. He was truly enjoying getting to know the legendary game Shangri-La Fronty. Meanwhile, in Firstia, the starting city, all the players were impressed by someone's gear who clearly wasn't a beginner and had no reason to be there. However, that character was Ri, who had come to Firstia to find Rakuro because she knew he used the same character name in every game he played. But she was frustrated not to find him there, not understanding why since every beginner player went to that city. Back with Rakuro, he began to battle the voracious Cobra, first planning to discover her attacks and movements, thinking that by doing so, she would be an easy opponent to defeat, especially because he couldn't afford to take any damage as that snake would undoubtedly finish him off with a single strike. Rakuro was quite confident that his plan would work, but as soon as he tried to make his first strike, his sword broke, making him realize how tough the snake's scales were. Still, Rakuro remained confident and armed himself with the two machetes he had obtained by defeating the rabbits, as they were stronger than the swords. He prepared to strike again, but the cobra was faster and hit him with a poisonous liquid that would cause damage every 10 seconds. Rakuro still thought it would be easy to win the battle, having conquered much harder games before, even though he now had a limited time of 4 minutes to defeat his opponent, as his life would end due to the poison after that. Rakuro believed he needed to find the cobra's weak point, but he had already noticed that in that game, nothing was random and critical hits were activated by landing an ideal blow or hitting the enemy's weak spot. He thought that being a snake covered in tough scales, her weak point should be the head, but Rakuro realized it was hard to hit it, leaving him with the option of creating a critical point. He struck a part of the cobra's body, creating a wound. With this, all he had to do was keep hitting that same spot to deal critical damage. However, even though his plan worked, the cobra had a lot of HP, and she managed to attack him, forcing Rakuro to dodge and stop his blows. In a matter of seconds, the cobra's wound healed, and Rakuro finally realized he had been overly confident just because he had cleared much lousier games, having acted arrogantly thinking he would defeat a strong opponent like her without taking any damage. The cobra managed to grab Rakuro by the mouth, but even though he knew he had underestimated that enemy, he wasn't willing to give up. Rakuro managed to free himself from the cobra's mouth and quickly struck her on the head. Then he sheathed one of his swords to hold her hair, and with his other hand, he launched another attack, finally defeating the boss of that area. With this, he reached level 14 and celebrated his victory, realizing that he had received snake scales and hair as a prize, which should be worth a decent amount of money. However, he received another dose of poison, finally remembering that he was still at risk of dying. Quickly, he allocated all the points he had earned in agility and energy to reach the city in time to buy an antidote. But he realized he didn't know where the shops were because he had never been to that city before. So it seemed less risky for him to look for respawn points, so that when he died, he would have the game saved. But Rakuro also didn't know where the respawn points were, meaning the situation was pretty dire for him. In the city, we see a couple talking. The girl, Mia, says she wants to tame a canine monster because she couldn't have pets in her apartment. But in this game, it was possible to train some critters. She asked for his help in doing so, calling the guy by his real name. He asked her to use his character's name, Reiji, within the game. He was super happy that after 3 months, he had convinced Mia, the girl he liked, to play that game, allowing him to demonstrate all his knowledge in that world. Suddenly, the two see a guy with a bird-like face running towards them in a panic. Mia thinks it's a monster and prepares to attack, but luckily, Reiji realizes that he has a character's name and explains that if she attacks, she'll become a player killer with a skull in front of her name, which Mia clearly didn't want to happen. Reiji deduces that Rakuro's desperation must be due to the snake's poison, so he shouts to him that the inn is in a white building right at the entrance of the city, where Rakuro can set his respawn point by lying in one of the beds there. Rakuro thanks him for the help and runs in the direction he pointed out, while Reiji explains to Mia that in the beginning, it's quite common for players to show up in the city desperate after being hit by the snake's poison. Reiji also understands that Rakuro sold his clothes and weapons to focus on agility, making Mia think he's very experienced. This makes Reiji quite happy and grateful to Rakuro for giving him the opportunity to show his knowledge to Mia. Meanwhile, in the inn, he finally arrives there and the attendant starts explaining how it works to rent a room. But Rakuro was desperate because his life would end at any moment, so he dismisses the explanations and quickly asks for a room, managing to reach the bed just in time as shortly after lying down, his HP reaches 0 and he receives the penalty for death. He disconnects from the game and thinks about how he narrowly avoided losing any items, realizing that he would have to thank Reiji for showing him where the inn was. Afterward, he walks through Secondale, this being his first city in the game. Rakuro then decides he needs a map, some recovery items, and new equipment, as he needs a more powerful main weapon to replace his starting dual swords. Suddenly, he realizes that all the players are staring at him, finding it strange to see a guy with a bird-like face who's practically half naked. This makes Rakuro think it might be a good idea to get some more appropriate clothing. So he goes to a store and buys the cheapest outfit there, made of mud toad skin, which is resistant to cuts. His goal wasn't defense, but rather to stop other players from staring at him as if he were weird. However, he doesn't buy the whole outfit, ignoring the mask that comes with it, as he already had his bird mask. Then he goes to the weapon shop to see what's available, hoping to get a high-quality weapon. But as he examines the catalog, he realizes that his Vorpal mesh sheets are much superior to all the weapons there. The store owner explains that the mesh sheets are rare items in the game, and if he wants something better, he'll have to craft it. Rakuro asks if the shop owner could make a weapon for him, and the guy responds that he would if Rakuro brought the necessary raw materials. So Rakuro goes to the Swamp of Difficulties to find ore, the material needed to make his weapon. But even after a while, Rakuro only manages to get 2 ores, finding more common rock than anything else, while he needed at least 6 of them to make his weapon. He still had to deal with all the swamp mud that made his movements very difficult, in addition to the heavy pickaxe he bought, which didn't help his situation at all. Suddenly, a seemingly harmless mud toad appears. So, Rakuro decides to leave the creature alone to save himself the trouble. However, the toad jumps, splattering mud all over him, testing his patience. Rakuro decides to attack the little monster and throws his pickaxe at it, knocking it down. Then he walks up to the creature, reflecting that, just like his leather outfit, which was made of mud toad skin and was resistant to blades, the toad must be as well. So he uses his axe for the first time, which he got from the goblin. But Rakuro becomes increasingly irritated due to the slowness of his steps caused by the mud hindering his character's movements. When Rakuro finally catches up to the toad, he hits it with his axe, easily defeating the monster. At this point, he sees 2 new characters in the game and thinks that with the summer vacation coming, many more players are likely to appear, which means that more players will soon be searching for materials. So Rakuro decides to continue mining to gather a good amount of raw materials before it becomes even harder to find ore with the increasing demand. After 3 hours, he manages to collect a substantial amount of ore. Then the weapon shop owner shows him the options he has with that material. But at this moment, he notices that Rakuro has also found the swamp coffin fossil, a rare material that can be used to craft the swamp dagger. Rakuro is impressed by the weapon and asks the shop owner to make 2 of those daggers for him. After Rakuro buys a map and a few other items, his 2 daggers are ready and he's amazed by how divine those weapons are. The shop owner explains that Rakuro should keep bringing materials to him to further enhance the weapons. At this moment, Rakuro realizes how the shop owner was conversing naturally, despite being a computer-controlled character, and he's impressed by the artificial intelligence. The man then warns Rakuro that it's not a good idea for him to leave the city at the moment because it's getting dark and the nighttime monsters are very dangerous. Rakuro thanks him for the warning, but he's someone who enjoys a good challenge and is eager to test his new weapons and advanced levels. In other words, the shop owner's warning only makes Rakuro more determined to leave the city at night to face the monsters. Meanwhile, Rei had already searched for Rakuro's character in all the starting areas, leaving only Secondale City. She faces the voracious Cobra and, being more advanced in the game, easily defeats her, thinking that only someone like Rakuro could manage to face such a tough opponent while still at the beginner level. At the same time, nearby, Rakuro starts to understand why the shop owner asked him not to leave the city at night, as the nighttime monsters were proving to be much stronger than the others, causing him to level up and gain new abilities. However, while fighting a red-hatted goblin, he realizes that the opponent is much stronger than a regular forest goblin, with a lot of HP, a unique fighting style, and the ability to summon multiple allies, a power that Rakuro thought should only be used by weaker monsters. Surrounded by the small creatures, Rakuro realizes he's in real trouble since even fighting just one of them was challenging enough. Even if he tried to escape, he didn't know if he would survive. But as he was enjoying the challenge, fleeing wasn't an option. He starts to fight the small goblins, but suddenly, he realizes he has underestimated the game once again because all the creatures are defeated due to the arrival of a new monster. Rakuro remembers that this wasn't just an ordinary game, it was divine. The opponent is a gigantic creature, a unique monster named Lekan, the Night Striker. Unfortunately for Rakuro, in the entire history of the Shangri-La Frontier game, no player had managed to defeat even one unique monster, as they were incredibly powerful and difficult to face. In the past, Rie was struggling to complete a very challenging game. She confided in Mana, the owner of the game store, about needing to find a way to finish it or else she'd never be able to embark on an adventure with Rakuro. So Mana suggested that Rie should play some flawless games to strengthen her skills since she didn't want to hold Rakuro back. This was the moment she introduced Rie to the divine game, Shangri-La Frontier, a game that any discerning gamer would want to check out. Rie mentioned that her sister enjoyed the game a lot, and Mana proposed that she should ask her sister to teach her everything she knew to become strong enough to guide Rakuro when he played. Rie accepted the challenge, determined to become proficient. However, what Mana didn't anticipate was that Rie would become addicted to Shangri-La Frontier. And so Rie became an exceptionally skilled player and set out to find Rakuro in the city of Secondale. There she crossed paths with Mia and Rigi, who informed her they had seen a character named Sumrako, which was Rakuro's in-game name. The two were taken aback by Rie's intimidating appearance. They explained that Rakuro used to wear a bird head and little clothing, but was now running because he had been poisoned by a snake, though they suggested he might have acquired new equipment. Rei realized that Rakuro had indeed managed to defeat the snake without visiting the first city, and as a token of gratitude for the information, she gave Mia and Riji a coordinates teleporter before speeding off in search of Rakuro. Mia inquired about who this player could be, and Riji speculated that based on her guild cloak, she belonged to a guild focused on unique monsters like Lycan, a night attacker. Since Mia didn't understand what these monsters were, Riji explained that they were a special class with a name and title. Most in-game monsters reappeared after being defeated, but unique monsters were a one-of-a-kind entity, rumored to have 7 in total. Nobody knew how to encounter them. Moreover, for each unique monster, there existed a guild formed by the best players to defeat that specific monster. So Rei was part of the guild designated to take down Lycan, the night attacker, who was currently standing in front of Rakuro. Lycan was essentially a powerful, gigantic black wolf that had swiftly defeated a group of red hat goblins, signifying that a single strike from him could reduce Rakuro's health to 0. Rakuro was paralyzed with fear as he gazed at Lycan, but after a while the monster finally launched an attack with its massive paw. Rakuro reacted quickly, defending himself with his new swords. Subsequently, Rakuro attempted to strike the wolf but had limited success. Nevertheless, he held on to hope, thinking it would be easy to defeat this unique monster. However, he knew that the battle would be challenging, and he was grateful for his new abilities gained from practicing all night, as without them he wouldn't have been able to block Lycan's attack. Rakuro had to remain vigilant as he managed to draw his knives and land a critical blow on the monster. They continued their battle with Rakuro doing well. Suddenly, the moon was obscured by clouds and Lycan vanished into thin air. Rakuro looked around searching for the creature when he realized it was right behind him. Rakuro merrily evaded it and managed another critical hit, but then Lycan disappeared once more. When it reappeared, the monster attacked Rakuro with full force, but Rakuro skillfully dodged every blow. However, the creature continued to vanish and reappear, making Rakuro wonder if the wolf could teleport. They continued their battle, and Rakuro noticed that Lycan's skin was even tougher than the cobra's scales, rendering his previous attacks ineffective. Despite delivering around 200 critical hits, Rakuro felt that he was making no progress in harming the monster. Furthermore, his Vorpei's blades, once nearly perfect, were now worn out. In other words, unless Rakuro could find a vulnerable spot on the wolf, his weapon would be destroyed. Rakuro admitted that the monster was too powerful for someone of his level, yet he continued to enjoy the divine game, relishing every challenge. Rakuro faced Lycan, delivering one critical hit after another. However, after a while, Lycan prepared to launch an attack. Rakuro believed that Lycan wouldn't be able to reach him from that distance, but the wolf began to howl, creating such a loud noise that it shattered some nearby rocks and froze Rakuro in midair. At that moment, the clouds covered the moon once more and Lycan disappeared again. However, Rakuro couldn't move, and as he fell, his body started to disintegrate. When he finally hit the ground, the wolf was there once more, but Rakuro was no longer able to fight, with half of his body already disintegrated. He couldn't comprehend the nature of that attack, but he noticed that for some reason, even after such a powerful blow, he still had 1 HP remaining. Nevertheless, he knew it wouldn't last long as the wolf stood right before him and he was unable to fight. Rakuro recognized that this unique monster was as strong as its creators intended, a perfectly programmed adversary. However, this also meant that it was possible to defeat Lycan, and that's precisely why Rakuro decides that his goal will not be a final boss, but rather to defeat Lycan, the Mega-Attacker. And so, Rakuro's life comes to an end. He wakes up in Ian's bed in the city where his respawn point is and notices that he has some marks on his body. He then discovers that he's cursed by Lycan. It prevents him from using any kind of equipment on the affected areas, which is a significant portion of his body. So he'll have to go without any equipment, just as he was at the beginning of the game, only this time it's not by choice. Rakuro is furious with Lycan, who appeared out of nowhere, devoured him, and cursed him. Thanks to Lycan, Rakuro was left with no equipment. The curse also grants resistance to magical effects on the affected areas, makes lower-level monsters flee from the character, and affects conversations with NPCs. To make matters worse, the curse can only be removed through the prayer of a saint or by defeating Lycan, a type of curse that must be destroyed at its root. Rakuro walks through the city so angry about the situation that he begins to compare this divine game to the trash he used to play, while other people are frightened by his bird-headed appearance and lack of clothing, just as it happened at the beginning of the game. Despite this, Rakuro decides to stay calm and remember the 3 principles he learned from playing bad games. First, to have a patient heart. Second, to have an unshakable spirit. And lastly, to have decisiveness. So if he steps away from the crowd to think calmly about what to do and analyzes his character sheet, discovering that he gained a lot of experience from fighting a unique monster. He leveled up, improved his skills, and had 50 stat points to distribute. He decides to distribute the points carefully, but without any defense or attack equipment. He allocates the points as if he were made of paper, considering that any blow could end him. Therefore, he invests everything in speed and resistance, disregarding all other options. However, Rakuro's best stat is still his luck with 65 points, which is probably the reason he survived the unique monster's initial attack with just 1 HP. He thinks he's been through a lot and had enough bad luck, so he wishes to rely a bit on his luck. Suddenly, a rabbit jumps right on top of his head. Rakuro wonders if this is a Vorpal rabbit, but it's quite different from others, wearing little clothes and a top hat. He ponders whether monsters could actually appear in the city while the rabbit waves goodbye to him. Not knowing what's going on, Rakuro decides to follow the animal. The chase begins, and while running, he concludes that this rabbit is indeed quite different from others and must offer a rare item, thinking it's a game event. After some time running, he finally corners the animal, but magically, a door appears. The rabbit goes through it, and Rakuro approaches the door, discovering that it leads to the Rabbit Country, a unique game location. Then he remembers reading that despite Shangri-La Frontier having a vast world exploration storyline, it also features some hidden side quests that are unknown to the public. Nobody knows when or where they will appear or what they do. Therefore, the equipment, abilities, and spells that one can obtain in these unique settings are always of high level, which makes game clans search for them. Rakuro opens the door, observing everything around, and believes that his luck is at play for him to have found something so valuable so early in the game. He decides he can't let this opportunity pass and steps through the door. However, Rakuro didn't notice that the door recommended the player to be at least level 80, while he was only at level 28, not even halfway to the game's recommendation. Rakuro then falls into the rabbit country called Rabbits, where everywhere he looks, there are these creatures and objects have little rabbit ears. At this moment, he's startled because the rabbit he was chasing before is right behind him, welcoming him. The rabbit says that everyone in Rabbits was eager to meet him because Rakuro had the courage to face a unique monster alone. It goes on about how brave Rakuro is and how powerful Lycan is. After a while of the rabbit chattering, Rakuro finally remembers that affecting NPCs was one of the effects of his curse. Then the rabbit finally introduces itself as Emil and says that their leader wants to meet Rakuro. Emil starts guiding Rakuro to their leader's palace, and Rakuro is worried that the leader might seek revenge for all the rabbits he killed. However, Emil reassures him, saying that their leader is not that type. Upon arriving at the rabbit palace, Rakuro is impressed by the place, and Emil explains that despite many players visiting their country, Rakuro will be the first to see the palace. This makes him feel special, thinking that luck was finally on his side. Next, Emil leads Rakuro into a room in the palace and enters, announcing to his leader that he brought the human of the Vorpal soul to meet him. When Rakuro sees Rabbits' leader, Vizag, he becomes quite frightened by his appearance and intimidating demeanor. Vizag says he thought humans had no talent, but it seems one is different, leaving Rakuro paralyzed with fear.